Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is words, more specifically code words. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been watching a sporting event and you're listening to the announcer as they are describing an athlete? Do you ever pay attention to the words that they use sometimes to describe these athletes? That's what I want to talk about on this episode. And I came to this topic because a few months ago, there was the NBA draft, right? And I'm a huge NBA fan, as many of you know, or maybe you don't know. But in hearing and watching and listening to the announcers talk about potential draftees, along with the NBA draft, they do this as well. You know, you're talking about someone's skill set. You're describing them physically, or maybe mentally, or maybe emotionally to your audience. And a lot of times your audience, while by and large, most of your audience knows at least a little bit about these players, sometimes they don't. And so I think it's very key as to how these athletes, both male or female, are being described. But if you're not careful, what you will hear if you're paying attention is some of these announcers, and I don't necessarily know if it's on purpose, but some of these announcers will use racial biases or stereotypes to talk about said athlete, right? Case in point, I'm watching the NBA draft and an announcer says, or let's say it didn't even have to be the draft. I could be watching a game. And they say, oh, that guy's very scrappy. Okay. Now, if we're being honest, I mean, this is a Keep It Real show, right? Let's peel the layers back, right? If we're being honest, if I told you that an athlete was scrappy, what color, if you're not looking at the TV or anything, what color do you think he is? If I told you that an athlete was scrappy, probably not black. I don't know that in all of the years that I've watched professional sports, as well as college sports, I don't know that I've ever heard a black player being called scrappy. Not to say that it hasn't happened, because I'm sure that it has. I just can't recall any time that it happened. And again, that's not to say that the people that I listen to talk about athletes are racist. I'm not saying that at all. But racial biases and racial tropes are sometimes used. Here's another one. High motor, high energy guy. Nope. Never to describe a black athlete. At least not that I've heard. Let me give you a few more. I heard an announcer say, oh, she's a gamer. I was watching a WNBA game and the announcer said, she's a gamer. Now, they don't mean gamer as in playing Xbox or PlayStation 5. A gamer means like they have a great feel for the game. Nope, not anybody black. I've heard a guy being described in college who was playing college football as he played quarterback, and the announcer described him as being sneaky athletic. Listen, I don't know how you get to be sneaky athletic. you're either athletic or you're not. Like, there's no really in between it. And people who know people who are athletic, they genuinely know that they're athletic. It's not like your athleticism doesn't sneak up on anybody. I'm gonna keep it 1,000, right? It just doesn't. Another word, winner. Now, I've heard winner, all races, all sexes. But yeah, if an announcer says somebody's a winner, check and see who they are. That's all I'm saying. Let's see, what other one? Oh, high IQ. Now, high IQ is very it's a very interesting way to describe someone. And the reason why I say that is because I remember as a young kid in the late 70s listening to, the announcers talk about people, more specifically football players, having high IQs. And I thought that was very interesting. Even at that age, I couldn't really wrap my head around what it actually meant. But to have a high IQ, like, it was different because at that particular time, like, I'll just pick a year, 1978. In 1978, at least to my recollection, without looking it up, there probably weren't a lot of black quarterbacks. And now if you follow the NFL, I'm going to venture to say that of the 32 NFL teams, probably more than half of them will have a starting quarterback that's black, leading their team. And that shows you a lot for progress, because there was a point in time in the NFL where they referred to you as the black quarterback. Like, I remember Doug Williams, who played for the then Washington Redskins, who won a Super Bowl in 1987. In the days leading up to the Super Bowl, one of the media members asked him, "How long have you been a black quarterback?" I mean, Doug's been black all his life. But here's the thing, though. It was a thing to have a quote unquote black quarterback, and they would refer to them as a black quarterback. It didn't matter if you were talking about Randall Cunningham or Warren Moon or whomever. They were called black quarterbacks. Now, the quarterback of your team is just the quarterback of your team. It's been many years since I've even heard remotely of anybody referencing a quarterback being black. Now, how they're treated is something totally different. But the point that I'm making is that there was once a time where a black quarterback like Patrick Mahomes would be referred to as the black quarterback. Lamar Jackson would be referred to as the black quarterback. And that time is no longer with us. Is it progress? I guess it depends on who you ask. Because, now I can't say people don't see race or color, because we all do. How we act on it is two different things, right? But I think for the most part, most fans, I always say this, fans care about the name on the front of their jersey, not the back. So it doesn't matter, for the most part, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, honestly, to the fans. Now, some fans do have an issue with black players. Some fans have an issue with white players. It just depends on who you are and where you are and what's going on. And for some fans, that's all that they see. But that's another subject for a whole nother day. We can get into that another episode. But the idea of high IQ, I wanted to touch on that as far as quarterbacks were concerned, because one of the reasons why we weren't black, as far as black quarterbacks weren't a thing in the 70s into the 80s and, started to happen a little bit in the 90s, was because the people, the general managers, the owners that are in positions of power did not think that, either consciously or subconsciously, that black men had the mental capability or the high IQ to run an offense. Conversely, throughout time, there was a point in time on NFL defenses where the middle linebacker was always white. And why was the middle linebacker white? The middle linebacker was white because the middle linebacker was the quarterback of the defense. He called the fronts for the defensive line. he called the coverages for the secondary. And it was his job to make sure to know where everybody was on that field. And so, yeah, for a long time, if you go back and look in your history, middle linebackers were almost always white, which was interesting because there's a guy that I know. His name is Harry Carson. He played for 13 years for the New York Football Giants. He was drafted out of South Carolina State University. And I know him because he's my uncle. And he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And he played middle linebacker, and he's black. But what was interesting was he was drafted out of South Carolina State, and he never played linebacker at South Carolina State. He played defensive end. And so they drafted him in the 4th round, and they moved him to middle linebacker so he could be the quarterback of the defense. And the coach that drafted him was the late, great Marty Schottenheimer. Rest in peace. And Marty took a chance on him because here it is, you're drafting this guy out of a small black college in South Carolina, and you're not sure, how he's going to translate as far as making the transition to the NFL, let alone playing a whole new position. But Marty knew something that a lot of people didn't know, was that my uncle, Harry Carson, had the mental and the high IQ to play the position. So you have to be very careful about these code words. And again, I'm just throwing out words that you hear you could hear it actually on a normal telecast. If you hear an announcer say, oh, well, they've got good fundamentals. Oof. Watch an NBA game, and if you hear an announcer say somebody's got good fundamentals, odds are likely that he or she is not talking about someone black. I mean, it's the truth. Look it up. This next phrase always kills me. They play the right way. Now, what is the quote unquote right way? And I will give you an example. I am one of the few people who is a big baseball fan. I'm a big fan of the New York Yankees. That's my team. That's my squad. But to hear other baseball fans talk about guys not playing the right way, my follow-up question is always, well, what is the right way? Like, what do you mean by playing baseball the right way? Because the job is to get a hit and get on base and score. That's the right way. I mean, like, you're not trying to score a touchdown in baseball, right? So I don't know what you mean. But like, are you feeling nostalgic for the golden eras of rap and soul music? If so, tune in to the Rap Soul Podcast. We are your weekly journey through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, spotlighting the music and the hidden gems that shape the soundtrack of our lives. From the powerful beats to the soulful melodies, we bring you the best of the past with fresh insights and stories. Rediscover the music that defined a generation. Subscribe to the Rap Soul Podcast and enjoy the vibes. If you want a podcast where culture, conversation, and life collide, where you get insightful commentary, engaging discussions, and a fresh perspective on everything, then you need to listen to the 12 Kyle Podcast. Hosted by the one and only, yours truly, 12 Kyle, a voice that you know and trust. This podcast will bring you thought-provoking moments, compelling stories, and a whole lot of fun. Whether you're a first-time listener or just tuning in, each episode promises to be something new and exciting. So sit back, relax, join 12 Kyle, myself, and my guests as we break down the world around us and give you stories that you've never heard before, from nostalgic throwbacks to everything in between. The 12 Kyle Podcast is a front row seat to this conversation. Subscribe now and never miss an episode of the 12 Kyle Podcast, where the vibe is always real and the discussion is always worth your time. There's just a lot of unwritten rules. Baseball is very, very insulated. It's very regional, and it's very, in spite of what people may think, baseball is very segregated. And the weird thing is that if you go to a baseball game, you'll see a lot of dark faces. but they don't speak English. And so that's a whole nother subject in and of itself. There's going to be a podcast about that down the road. But yeah, I'm always bothered by people saying that such and such doesn't play the game the right way. I remember watching. I'd never forget this. I remember watching an old game between the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers in the 80s. Shout out to Baylor. And I remember the announcer. The announcer was Dick Stockton. And Dick Stockton is one of the best, NBA announcers ever. And he said, something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said something about Boston players being true, hard lunch pail guys. I'm like, lunch pail guy? And I mean, I'm a kid now. I don't know anything. I'm like, what does he mean by lunch pail guys? He's like the guys that come to work, bring the lunch pail, like they're coming to work every day. No, that ain't it, Dick. It ain't it. I knew what he meant. Now, as an older man, I understand what he meant. That's not the right place to say it, particularly when you look at how Boston looked in 85 as opposed to how LA looked in 85. Nah, Dick, you can't say that, man. You just can't. Another code word, heady or cerebral. Yeah, that's culturally biased. You can't say heady or cerebral. You don't see it a lot. You hear it a lot, but you don't see it when you're talking about describing a black player. I mentioned sneaky, athletic, deceptive speed. And the one that is the kicker, being called a gym rat. I've never, ever heard an announcer say, that guy's a gym rat. And gym rat means like you're in the gym all the time. You're working on your fundamentals. You're working on your game, that type of thing. Like you hit the first one in, the last one out, that type of thing. You don't hear anybody in today's NBA being called a gym rat. Now, granted, the athletes today make millions and millions of dollars, not like they did in the 60s and the 70s. So I get it, but gym rat, that's not a code word that you're ever going to hear in today's NBA. And you have to ask why. Why was it something that was said in the 80s as opposed to now? And I think, there's a level of racial thing there going there, and you have to address it. You just have to. I love it when when the announcers say the athletes have intangibles. Listen, we all got intangibles. When you go to work tomorrow, you show off your intangibles. Show your boss your intangibles. What's another one? Gets the most out of their abilities. What that means is like you don't have a lot of talent, but you make do with the talent that you have. Like you wasn't born with a bunch of athleticism, but you make do with what you have, or you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, all of the phrases. Another one has a lot of heart. Yeah, that, like as if nobody else on the court or the field or the diamond or the ice has any heart. A grinder. That's another one. Grinder. I've never heard anybody called a grinder. Or someone who's a hustler, just he'll out hustle you. That just, like I said, again, I don't know necessarily that these announcers are doing this on purpose, but it's just the fact of like, it's always been a thing, and it's something that I think people need to be more aware of. And one of my favorites. Have you ever been watching a game and an announcer is talking about a particular athlete and they go on and on about the athlete, and one of the things that they say is, this guy is, quote, someone you would want your daughter to date, close quote. That is so wild to me in 2025. I heard that saying growing up a lot, but come on, let's be real. But on the flip side, there are other attributes that you hear when you hear about someone being athletic or a dual threat, or they have fast twitch. Now, fast twitch means that your muscles are, or your body type is a certain way, and you have the ability or the agility to turn and move and change directions. Your fast twitch muscles, meaning that you can change directions or leap very quickly. But we hear about people being strong, aggressive, tough, massive. You hear that a lot in football. Oh man, they have this massive, look at that guy. He's a massive human being. He's so strong and so tough inside. Nah. Dominating. That's another one. Dominating, intimidating, and physical. Those three words get thrown around way too much. Oh, they were dominating them. They were so intimidating when they stepped off the bus. They were so intimidating when they took the field. They were so physical that they moved everybody out of the way. I mean, you don't have to go far to hear a game and hear that. And again, those are code words. And I think ultimately we have to be aware that these words exist, but we also have to call people out when they use them, because if you're not careful, you'll use them yourself. And those words, I think, are built in racial stereotypes. I'll never forget Al Campanis, the late Al Campanis. I think he was the general manager for the Dodgers. He was on Nightline one night with Ted Koppel, and he made some very offensive comments about, black people not being able to swim. Our bone structures don't have buoyancy and stuff like that. I was like, and I was probably about 14, 15 years old. And I knew then, as he was talking, like, brother, you're going to lose your job. You were going to lose your job. And I also remember Jimmy the Greek Snyder. He was the numbers guy. He was the, I guess he would, if you would equate him to today, he would be like the fantasy football guy. He was the prognosticator for CBS. And I remember there was he was in somewhere in DC, and there was a local TV station that interviewed him, and Jimmy had a few. You could tell he had a few. You could see him on camera. He'd had a few. So he was on his own. He wasn't at work at CBS, but they asked him, and he started rambling, started saying some things. And he said slavery. And he talked about how the black athlete was, strong and better than any other athletes in the world. And he said because they were, basically cultivated, because you had a big black male slave, and you had a big black woman slave, and they would mate and have big black kids. And they were used to do that in the fields and everything like that. And they got him up out of the paint. But I will say this much. While it might not have been the right place or the right time to say what he said, if you go back and look at his comments, Jimmy the Greek wasn't lying. So, but he got canceled. And this was, I think this was like 87, 80. It was somewhere around there. He got canceled and removed from the paint so fast. And that was even before, you could actually cancel somebody. But honestly, he wasn't lying. But I mean, sometimes, when it comes to history and the truth, particularly in sports, people don't want to hear it. And so, I understood why they got rid of him, but I wasn't necessarily I wasn't offended by what he said. Now, there's been plenty of times where there have been people who aren't black have said things publicly, and I'm like, oh, that's offensive as hell. And then there are other times where people have said something, I'm like, oh, well, that's not offensive. Or at least I'm not offended. But what doesn't offend me may offend others. And then sometimes it's best not to say anything, because you just open your mouth and you let people know how you truly feel. But in conclusion, I think these code words, you just have to be very careful. I've noticed that there's a trend, particularly with broadcasters, that let's say you're talking about the NFL, right? and you're talking about, I don't know, let's just say Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is a receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Kupp is white. He's one of the best receivers in the game, but he's white. And so, like, if you're describing Cooper Kupp, an announcer may say, Cooper Kupp gets in and out of his breaks just like a young Wes Welker did. Guess what color Wes Welker was? Like, you never hear an announcer compare Cooper Kupp to, I don't know, Torrey Holt. Torrey Holt was black, right? And Cooper Kupp's game might be influenced and might be just like Torrey Holt's. But they're not going to say that. They're going to compare him to Wes Welker. They're going to compare him to somebody that looks like him. And that's not fair to Cooper Kupp. It's not fair to Wes Welker either. But I think a lot of times, if you're not careful, these code words can really show your ignorance. And there's a lot of things that we have in this world that we need to get rid of. Code words is one. Ignorance is a whole nother one. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday and every Sunday. If you're on YouTube, check us out on YouTube. Download, subscribe, like, share it with a friend. Also, we have a new baby. It is called the Rap Soul Podcast. You can find the Rap Soul Podcast wherever you're listening or watching this podcast as well. It's a music podcast where we talk about rap, soul, hip hop, and R&B artists from the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. Simply put, it's the best music podcast that you've never heard. So make sure that you check it out. Also, we have merch. If you click the show notes, go to the description box, click the link that says merch. You can find 12 Kyle Podcast t-shirts, hoodies, as well as coffee mugs. We got it for the low. Once again, folks, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000. Cheer.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle Podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle Podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.